Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto this week, THC-infused beverages are coming to the United Center in Chicago. That's right, the home of the Bulls and the Blackhawks will be the first big league venue to allow it. Yet in the same week, the Chicago City Council wants to ban all THC-infused beverages from that city, unless you already have a liquor license. Plus, did you see what U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand said at the High Rise event in New York City this week? Quote, "I need President Trump to want to do cannabis. Maybe we should offer him a cannabis license for New York so he can make a ton of money, and then he will be for this industry. So, I don't know, but that's just one theory," unquote. Obviously, the senator was kidding. And the NRA joins the cannabis lobby in support of freeing gun rights for cannabis consumers, while nothing is moving on the DOJ's executive directive to move cannabis to Schedule 3. Plus, all the while, the DEA says it's drafting a rule to reschedule cannabis ASAP. Is that cannabis standard time? Plus, did Florida's Smart and Safe campaign for an adult use ballot question in the fall reach its signature goal for a February 1st deadline? Plus, state reports from California where vape sales passed flower sales for the first time ever, while Kentucky adds another medical dispensary to their new program. And an international report, including Brazil passing a bill to allow a medical program to proceed. All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. I'm Elena Pinto. This is the weekly program produced by WPCMTV that is documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition here in the United States and around the world. Up first this week, a sign of normalization. The United Center in Chicago, Illinois, the home arena for the NBA's Chicago Bulls and the NHL's Blackhawks. And now people who attend events at the arena, not those games, but events at Chicago's largest indoor arena, will have the opportunity to buy THC-infused beverages. Two products produced by Green Thumb Industries, Senorita and Rhythm Brands, inked the multi-year deal with the United Center that will also include a pop-up designated distribution bar. It's great news, but the caveat to this is that those drinks will not be at those professional sports games, just other events. Another caveat to this, because in the same week this happened, the Chicago City Council banned THC-infused beverages in their city, unless you have a liquor license. Since this is a major win in a major market for THC-infused hemp beverages, Kerry Hinkle has much more.
I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we have some exciting developments in the city of Chicago as it relates to hemp beverages. Somewhat tied to policy, which is what we normally cover on this segment. Chicago recently passed an ordinance that would ban all hemp products besides beverages. Now, the mayor still has to sign this ordinance into law, and there's a chance the mayor would veto it. But if it passes, effective April 1st, only hemp-derived beverages will remain legal in the country's third biggest city. Now, what's exciting and related to the policy developments here is at the same time, the United Center, which is where the Blackhawks and the Bulls and tons of concerts and other big-time events in the city take place, will start selling hemp-derived beverages from Green Thumb Industries. This will be through their lines of Rhythm and Senorita. They will be 5 milligram products with 4 different SKUs. Now, an important caveat here is that those products will not be available at Bulls or Blackhawks games due to the NFL and NBA league rules, but it will be available at other events. So next time Zach Brown Band is playing in Chicago at the United Center, you will be able to find a hemp-derived 5 milligram beverage. It's huge news, not only for the hemp industry and the general adoption of cannabis around the country, but it signals to lawmakers, too, that at least one form factor, beverages, is here to stay. we've heard rumors of other stadiums in Miami and Nashville and other big cities considering also including hemp-derived beverages. The first stadium I had ever heard of that did it was in Portland, and it was the Portland Pickles, which is an independent baseball team, and they were selling 2 milligram cycling frogs right next to their Coors Light and Miller Lite. So very exciting news in Chicago for the beverage industry as it relates to hemp, but also emblematic given the policy shifts that just happened right before this business agreement was announced. So again, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp and Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We'll see you again next week.
So what's the latest on rescheduling? That seems to be on the minds of anyone in the industry, and all of them want to see federal reform launched by the president's executive order for starting the rescheduling process. In an event in New York City this week, U.S. Senator Kristen Gillibrand attended the High Rise event in conjunction with Cultivated and Gotham Media. At the event, the pro-cannabis Democrat was asked about how to continue the momentum President Trump started back in December of last year. She has been using her access to the president to get him to continue to drive his Republican Party toward federal reform. And in an interview with Jeremy Burke, Senator Gillibrand said, quote, "I need President Trump to want to do cannabis. If I can get him convinced it is a great business, maybe we should offer him a cannabis license for New York so that he can make a ton of money and then he will be for this industry." So I don't know, but that's just one theory, unquote. She later admitted that she was kidding when she said it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that Gillibrand and others on both sides of the political aisle are trying to build off his form of leadership on this issue. We've already reported on the positive trickle-down effect from the news conference when he signed the executive order on December 18th. Stocks went up, and some state legislatures are picking up on the opportunity to move forward with their own decriminalization initiatives for medical programs. Some, like Virginia, are poised to become the next adult use legal state before the end of this year, bringing that total to 25, or half of this country's states, a symbolic mark for sure. Here's Joe Parsons with his Virginia update.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 through WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I have a positive update to report from last week's report. Virginia House and Senate lawmakers approved bills to legalize adult use sales. The Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee approved an adult use cannabis market proposal from Senator Aird on an 8-7 vote. And the update from last week, a House General Laws Subcommittee advanced a companion bill from Delegate Paul Kryzak in an amazing 7-0 vote. Delegate Kryzak went on record saying, "The bill has a tremendous amount of input and intent. And with intention, we hope we can make it to the finish line." He went on to say that pretty much 99.5%, if you will, are on the same page with the legislation, and the reform is overdue. As an activist for justice, I have some more good news to report. The new cannabis resentencing bill, HB 26, has officially passed the House of Courts and is now heading to the Appropriations Committee to hopefully advance and move one step closer to becoming law. This bill would allow for simple cannabis-only convictions to have a chance to be resentenced once the laws change. This could possibly reinstate voting rights, restore the right to own a weapon, restore their integrity, and further possible employment opportunities. And lastly, Virginia's Lobby Day was held on Groundhog Day this year in Richmond, also known as People's Policy Day, and was sponsored by Marijuana Justice. This event was a space where policy leaders and the public could meet to discuss the policies that affect Black and Brown communities, and where anyone who wants to make a difference could be heard. I, for one, support their efforts. You can get involved by going to www.marijuanajustice.org. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
Back in Washington, D.C., the pro-cannabis reform effort is now being joined by one of the most powerful lobbies in politics, the National Rifle Association. A champion for protection of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, the NRA is teaming up with NORML and the Drug Policy Alliance to urge the Supreme Court to uphold a lower court ruling that a statute violates that Second Amendment. The NRA's argument is that justifying firearms prohibition for marijuana users when they are not intoxicated is not consistent. Quote, with our nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, that tradition supports restrictions on the use of firearms while intoxicated, but it does not support disarming individuals when they are sober, merely because they sometimes use intoxicants, unquote. Now let's check in on the Southwest region of the United States with Tina Tasaka.
I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis Ex America, and this is the Southwest Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As I reported 2 weeks ago, Arizona is facing a new push to our recent updates now that concern local Arizona politicians. Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona is front and center. Biggs, along with fellow Arizona Republican Paul Gosar, supports a repeal effort backed by anti-legalization group SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. The proposal would end adult use cannabis sales statewide while keeping medical marijuana legal. Supporters must collect nearly 256,000 signatures by July to get it on the Arizona November ballot, putting the state's $1 billion cannabis market at risk, with Biggs playing a key role in the fight. Arizona has potential medical expansion. State Representative Selena Bliss has proposed legislation this month to add terminal illness to the list of qualifying conditions for medical marijuana, aiming to provide a legal alternative to opioids for end-of-life care. Nevada's market is focusing on regulatory refinement and administrative leadership changes under Governor Lombardo. Here's a summary. Cannabis Compliance Board leadership in January 2026, the CCB welcomed new member L. Christopher Rath. This follows the appointment of Major General Andra L. Berry as the new CCB chair in late December 2025. In regulatory focus, recent CCB meetings in January have prioritized strengthening independent testing laboratory regulations, Regulation 11, to ensure product safety and potency accuracy. Current possession limits: adults 21 and older can possess up to 1 ounce of flower or 1/8 of an ounce of concentrated marijuana. Public consumption remains illegal except in specifically licensed cannabis lounges, and there's only 2 of those. That's it for the Southwest highlights. I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis Ex America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Earlier in the show, Carrie Hinkle reported on the THC ban voted on by the Chicago City Council, but there is more happening in Illinois now that the legislative session has just begun in their state house. With that story, here's Cole Preston from the Cole Memo podcast.
I'm Cole Preston with the Cole Memo with this week's Illinois Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Another year here in Illinois brings another legislative session, and with that, we have several cannabis-related proposals that have been filed, including what's known as the Cannabis Omnibus, which includes language for both medical cannabis patients and the industry here in Illinois. One of the provisions that has the most support would allow medical cannabis patients to shop at any dispensary statewide. The bill would also require dispensaries to implement patient prioritization plans, whether that be dedicated lines or hours. I recently sat down with Jason Brown from Illinois News Joint for episode 256 of the Cole Memo podcast.
Again, a lot of that stuff is just normal fixing what you need to do for a regular law.
As Jason was saying, these proposals are not controversial expansions. They're practical fixes that lawmakers have struggled to pass for years at this point. Now, I want to be clear, all of these bills have just been filed. They've not even advanced out of committee and would still need to go through the Illinois House, Senate, and be signed into law by the governor before any of this language could take effect. But I suppose that's something that all of us Illinois advocates and industry stakeholders could work towards during this year of 2026. Now, that'll do it for this week's Illinois Cannabis Report. Once again, I am Cole Preston from the Cole Memo, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Taking a look at California now, there's been an interesting development in the nation's #1 cannabis market. For the first time ever, vape sales have exceeded flower sales, at least in the legal market. It was in July of last year that vapes passed flower sales of cannabis for the first time. By December of 2025, that gap has grown larger, with $124.4 million in vape sales and just $107 million for flower. On top of that development, the California legislature is moving to ban all disposable e-cigarette vapes, which in turn would ban the same disposable vapes for cannabis products. Well, now let's check in with Matthew Friedlander in Washington State, where that state continues to move forward with their plans to add social consumption to their adult use market.
Hi, I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. I reported earlier this week from the state capitol here in Washington. I was down there with the Cannabis Alliance for our annual lobby day. We had about 50 meetings with different legislators over the course of the day. Another great turnout and another great event. It definitely helps to move our legislative agenda forward, having these kinds of meetings and relationships with our lawmakers. And one important piece of legislation that we were able to move forward out of committee, it was passed out of committee on Friday, and that is our cannabis hospitality bill. So we are very excited about that. This bill will create legal spaces to be able to consume cannabis here in Washington State. Currently, there is no legal place to use cannabis outside of your own home. And with the World Cup coming up later this year, there are going to be people from all over the world here to enjoy the festivities. And many of those people will be partaking in the use of cannabis. Another important piece of legislation that we have in front of the legislator this year is our home grow bill. It is still a Class C felony for an individual to grow a single plant of cannabis at home. I often say that we commercialize cannabis here in Washington State. We did not fully legalize it. And home grow and this consumption bill would be two important steps in that direction. There is also legislation put forth by another trade group here in the state that would restructure the way cannabis taxes are collected. It would be a milligram tax on concentrates and would be a substantial increase of tax on flour. Not a real popular bill. We're keeping an eye on it because it will be, it's called Necessary to Institute the Budget, which means that this bill will be alive till the very last second of session, and lots of weird things can happen when you're dealing with legislation that concerns the budget. So we are going to be watching this one closely. Again, not a real popular piece of legislation for the industry, and we're hoping that it's not going to go any further than it has. So that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington State. My name is Matthew, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You will never guess where Kimmy Cannabis is. Usually reporting from her native Oklahoma, she is in Hawaii for their cannabis conference. Do you think she might actually take a week off and enjoy paradise? Well, she probably will, but she is able to file a report this week.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Canna Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. While Canna Talk About It is covering the Hawaii Cannabis Expo and the prestigious Aloha Cup competition in Oahu, Oklahoma was absolutely popping with award events celebrating the best in our state's cannabis industry. And one company continues to rise as a true Oklahoma standard of excellence, Be Elevated. Formed in 2019 by four guys in Yukon, Oklahoma, Be Elevated quickly made a name for themselves with their live local infused honey and early patient favorites like their cake pops. But this brand didn't stop at tasty innovation. They built a reputation rooted in patient care and quality from day one. In May of 2021, Joshua Graston joined forces with Be Elevated, bringing Eco time-release capsules to the market. Later that year in October, they launched a cancer patient program that has since served 127 patients, with many reported to be in complete remission over the past 4 years. Today, Be Elevated is known for those time-release capsules, their sister tincture line, luxury handcrafted chocolates, and live rosin gummies, all while holding a firm commitment to being leaders not only in production and innovation, but in the true patient advocacy. And this year's alone, Be Elevated brought home over 20 awards, recognizing excellence and quality across the board. I'm also hearing that Be Elevated has just been invited to provide cannabis education at Rocklahoma as part of the Cowboy Cup crew. And I'll have more details on that coming soon. That's it from Hawaii, reporting on Oklahoma. I am Kimmy Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
That'll do it for the A block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. But in the B block, we look at the international scene, and the country of Brazil is ready to implement a legal way to grow cannabis for medicinal purposes. We'll check in on Europe with Dave Barton next, as Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to the second section, or B block, of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. This is our international section where we look at developments on cannabis reform around the world. In South America, and the country of Brazil made a major step in reform this week. Anvisa is Brazil's health regulator, and this week they expanded their existing laws to allow cultivation of the plant for pharmaceutical and scientific purposes. Anvisa is still limiting the maximum THC concentration in the plants to 0.3%, which is the legal definition of hemp in the United States. However, they are going to allow growing of cannabis without THC limits, granting authorization to institutions rather than individuals doing research. These changes also allow patient organizations access to the plant who will work under the authority of Anvisa. Now let's check in with Dave Barton in the UK with the European report.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your international cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Europe's cannabis scene stayed active this week, with regulatory twists and judicial drama shaping policy across the continent. In Brussels, the Court of Justice of the European Union ruled that Hungary violated EU law by voting against the EU's common position on UN cannabis rescheduling, a decision that could reverberate through future bloc-wide drug policy coordination. Critics say the judgment underscores the tension between national resistance and coordinated cannabis reform at an EU level. In Spain, legal challenges continue to roll in, with the Supreme Court accepting a pharmacist's appeal against rules that bar community pharmacists from dispensing cannabis prescriptions, a move patient advocates hope will expand access beyond hospital pharmacies. Across the German market, production is ramping up as Demacan doubles its capacity and hosts the Minister-President of Saxony, highlighting continued commercial investment in one of Europe's most significant cannabis economies. Despite these policy pushes, broader public health data remind us that cannabis remains the most widely used illicit drug in Europe, with roughly 24 million adults reporting use in the past year and ongoing debate over how to balance access with harm reduction. And in the UK, while cannabis policy stories were lighter this week, international shifts in legal frameworks, including moves abroad that might influence UK sentiment, kept industry watchers talking. That's all for this week. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your International Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report.
Back here in the United States, the Smart and Safe Florida advocates who have been trying to get the adult use ballot question resurfaced was facing a February 1st deadline to collect the signatures needed to get the question on the ballot. Entering this weekend, they were still about 60,000 signatures short, so they might have to wait until the next election cycle. Even if they do collect and certify all those signatures, they will still need 60% of the voters to approve the adult use regulations. In the last election, they were only able to get 56% of voters to approve the question. In the meantime, the country's largest multi-state operator, Trulieve, opened its 163rd medical dispensary in the Sunshine State and 235th store nationwide. Now, let's check in with Amy Carter to see what's going on in Michigan now that the tax increase is in place and prices have plummeted. Here's Amy.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, New Buffalo. A recent township hall was packed as residents sounded off about the explosion of cannabis dispensaries in their community. By the end of 2026, New Buffalo could have nearly one dispensary for every 70 residents, with already 29 open and 6 more planned, the most of any township in Michigan. While the town is expected to bring in more than $1.4 million in cannabis tax revenue, many locals say the trade-off isn't worth it. Residents worry that the town's small business, family-friendly vibe is being replaced by a regional cannabis destination, or as some people now call it, New Buffalo. Traffic near Exit 1 and along US 12 was a major concern, especially with heavy out-of-state traffic and safety issues. Next, Oakland County, 2 dispensaries landed in hot water last month after the state's cannabis regulatory agency flagged multiple violations. Joyology of Lake Orion and Superb Cannabis Company were both hit with several thousands of dollars in fines as part of the CRA's December enforcement actions. And finally, the Michigan Ganja Report is opening the polls to crown Michigan's best dispensaries for 2026. And they want your input, whether it's the vibes, the bud tenders, the selection, or the deals. Every licensed dispensary in the state is fair game. Head to their website to cast your vote. Winners will be announced next month. That's it for this week. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Minnesota is rolling out its first dispensaries and grow facility licenses, but now they are making a little history with the first city-run dispensary in Anoka. The other history that is being made in Minneapolis is not something residents will soon forget. The tactics of Homeland Security and ICE that has caused 2 deaths of American citizens is shameful. This is something our Minnesota correspondent, Alicia Bellamy, has been deeply disturbed by, and rightfully so. She's been dealing with the violence in the streets of her town of Minneapolis, and the usually soft-spoken woman who is a board member for the Minnesota Cannabis College, as well as a licensee with Herbs and Herbs, is very shaken up. Here's Alicia Bellamy with that story and what it's been like to be in the middle of what she calls a war zone.
I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report. I'm also on the board of trustees for the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. One thing about Minnesota is that we're not afraid of ice and snow, especially in February. But this is not the kind of ice that we thought that we'd be surrounded by. The cannabis community is frightened. Cannabis is not federally legal, so what's going to stop them from raiding us if we don't vote their way or go their way? One of our own community activists, civil rights attorney, and cannabis business owner, Nikema Armstrong, was arrested not that long ago, and she has been released. She was at a church letting people know that the people that were running the church were actually upper management in the ICE. Don Lemon was just recently arrested too for broadcasting the events that were actually taking place. And the cannabis community in Minnesota, we're frightened and we don't know what to do. But one thing about Minnesota is that we're very community oriented and we help our neighbors and we love our neighbors. I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Smoking marijuana in a car with a child could soon give Alabamians a criminal record, and a child who smells like marijuana could trigger a state abuse investigation under legislation the Alabama House approved Thursday after a floor fight over race, enforcement, and how far the state should go into private family life. Representatives passed House Bill 72 on January 29th by a 77-2 vote with 18 abstentions. The bill, sponsored by Patrick Sellers, now heads to the Alabama Senate, where its most controversial provisions are expected to face renewed scrutiny. At the center of the bill is a new Class A misdemeanor that would make it illegal to smoke or vape marijuana in a motor vehicle when a person under 19 is present. The prohibition applies whether the vehicle is moving or parked, and regardless of whether windows are open or closed. Anyone convicted under the new offense would be required to complete an education course developed by the Alabama Department of Public Health, which lawmakers described during the debate as focusing on the dangers of drug and marijuana exposure to children. The bill's most egregious element would significantly expand Alabama's mandatory reporting laws. Under HB 72, teachers, medical professionals, and other mandatory reporters would be required to notify the Department of Human Resources if a child smells like marijuana, directing the agency to investigate the report as suspected child abuse or neglect. Supporters say the bill is a child safety and public health measure, arguing lawmakers have a duty to protect children from secondhand marijuana smoke and vapor and to ensure the state can intervene when exposure is suspected. Sellers said the proposal stems from concerns raised by educators and others who have encountered children arriving at school smelling of marijuana, and he argued existing law leaves too many gaps. Opponents, including several Democrats, warned the bill's language is vague and subjective, raising alarms about racial profiling, uneven enforcement, and parents being investigated for conduct tied to older minor children rather than adults, as Alabama considers them minors until the age of 19. Lawmakers also questioned how a determination that a child smells like marijuana would be made. Who would make that judgment? And what threshold would trigger a DHR intervention? A bill's passage included a notable number of abstentions, reflecting some discomfort among lawmakers despite broad approval. It should be noted that an abstention is counted as a yes vote in Alabama. Floor debate included procedural objections as well as broader arguments about criminalizing marijuana-related conduct and expanding the reach of child welfare authorities. HB 72 now moves to the Senate, where it will be referred to a committee and could be amended before any floor vote. If approved by the Senate and signed by the governor, the bill is scheduled to take effect October 1st, 2026. Cannabis outside the state's medical cannabis program, which has yet to be available, is illegal in Alabama. Due to a lack of licenses required by the new HB 445 hemp law and its ban on any smokable products, there is no circumstance in which smoking the plant is legal in the state. Stay tuned to Sweet Home Cannabama Radio on FM Talk 106.5 on the Gulf Coast and live streamed on the Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page every Monday at 7 p.m. Central for all things cannabis and hemp in Alabama. I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Massachusetts, the battle over the prohibitionist ballot initiative continues. It looks like the question to shut down the adult use market will be on the ballot in the fall this year. So now the focus for advocates and the industry will be countering the prohibitionist $1 million plus media campaign. In the meantime, the Cannabis Control Commission made a few tweaks to the delivery rules in the Bay State. Here's Curtis Emery.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the news this week, the CCC met and voted unanimously to add another 3-year carve-out period for its cannabis delivery program framework here in the state. Starting in 2022, the state has been working to collect data on cannabis delivery programs through its social equity program here in the state. The CCC has been giving out licenses for cannabis delivery in communities which were disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, and they've been getting great information. However, just not enough yet to know what a fully implemented cannabis delivery system might look like here in the Bay State. They now have 3 more years to gather the necessary data to find out what a full implementation just might look like. Also in the news, the state has still yet to come up with final guidance on the mass cannabis overhaul bill, which has been in the courts since this summer. WAMC Northeast Radio was able to get some comments regarding what is going on with the conference, which is examining these overhaul measures. Of those comments, 2 seem to stick out. One being the increase in licensees caps, which the conference members hoped would help alleviate some of the financial struggles here in the state, allowing companies who are ready to move on from the cannabis space to sell their licenses to a larger business and allow that business to continue running things. Also in there is dealing with hemp in the state. It's no longer just a cash crop with the inclusion of synthetic cannabinoids or intoxicating hemp products. There's some more gray zones that the CCC is going to need to hammer out before they can have a final say on just what we're going to be doing here in the state. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
2 years ago, Scott's Miracle Grow created a separate division for their initiative in the cannabis industry called the Hawthorne Gardening Company. That move has now turned into a $2 billion disaster. Now Hawthorne is being acquired by Vireo Growth, a multi-state vertical operator specializing in medicinal products and wholesaling their products in Maryland, Minnesota, New York, and Arizona. This is just another example of the challenges to operate solely inside the cannabis industry and another example of the consolidation of companies that are struggling in the industry. Let's check in with our man who is high on Wall Street, Doug Miller, to see what impact this acquisition might have on that sector of the market. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street. This week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Vireo Growth announced it's acquiring the Hawthorne Gardening Company, the cannabis cultivation supply arm of Scott's Miracle Grow. Hawthorne's a major player in nutrients, lighting, and hydroponic equipment used across the indoor cannabis industry. As part of the deal, Chris Hadradorn, Executive Vice President at Scott's Miracle Grow and the executive lead of Hawthorne, is expected to join Vireo's board once the transition is complete, bringing deep industry and capital markets experience. Scott's decided the best move for shareholders was shifting to an equity participation model with Viero rather than running the business directly. That move makes sense since Scott's has been steadily distancing itself from cannabis. Last year, Hawthorne Collective was moved to an independent strategic partner, and the company had burned nearly $2 billion. So let's take a look at Viero Grow's stock chart and see how it looks with this news. It's trading around 53 cents, and it appears to be setting up along with the rest of the cannabis stocks. So let's see if something's going to be happening in the sector soon. It looks like it could be. So trade smart and lock in those profits. That's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
More changes in Missouri as a House committee unanimously passed a bill to move intoxicating hemp products into licensed cannabis dispensary, a move that is becoming more and more regular. Our man in the Show Me State, Brandon Jones, has more.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And yes, here in the state of Missouri, they are talking about banning intoxicating hemp again. This is the fourth year in a row where they're talking about having some sort of ban on THCA and other intoxicating hemp products that are sold at a wide array of stores here in the state of Missouri, from gas stations to smoke shops, all over different places, all over the state of Missouri. You can find THC products, from flour to gummies. All sorts of THC products, or quote-unquote intoxicating hemp, is found throughout the state. So what they are proposing with this bill is that there's actually two bills they're proposing right now. One is that they would not allow THCA or intoxicating hemp to be sold anywhere but the dispensaries that are licensed in the state of Missouri. And the other one is, the bill is trying to allow the dispensaries to be able to sell it, but not outlaw it at all the other places. So they've got two different bills that are getting ready to go into place here, trying to figure out what they're going to do with THCA or intoxicating hemp. Some of the dispensaries want to be able to sell it inside of their stores, and the others want to be able to not allow other people to be able to sell it, because there is quite a market for THCA at other places. One of the stores that I work at, Dr. Smoke, is in Westport down here in Kansas City, and sells a lot of THCA products and a lot of federally legal and compliant products. So the state of Missouri, people that are in the cultivation license and all the license facilities aren't too happy with people being able to go and buy medicine in a different place. So kind of different places, different people trying to put their spin on the law. But that is what's going on here in the state of Missouri. We'll see what happens with the bill. And one of them is an emergency vote. So if it passes, it would go into act immediately to where the THCA would not be able to be sold anywhere but those licensed facilities. So I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution. Have a great week.
Another adult use legal state that has moved its intoxicating hemp products into licensed dispensaries is Ohio, where Christina Brisson lives, and she is keeping an eye on her state's cannabis market and some of the cannabis changes they have to live with now that the legislature has made new rules. Here's Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So just a little quick review for this week here. We're going to talk about that sales revenue. If you remember, it all got held up until SB 56 got approved, and now they've been releasing those funds. Well, let's see how things can look a little different by state. Since Michigan right here is close by, Michigan gets their sales based on the number of licenses in each section city, or however they are broken up. So that's how those municipalities are paid. Whereas ours are paid on commission based on the amount of sales you have. So Columbus saw $4.7 million come to them for last year's sales, whereas Detroit saw $3.14 million. So far it's looking a little better for the sales base, but that said, smaller towns are obviously seeing less. Now, the way it was approved for voter registration or voter cannabis when we put it into law was that it would be a 10% tax, and of that 10% tax, 36% goes to municipalities. So with the newer version of SB 56, it does change the allocation. I'm not saying a lot about which city it affects or how it's going to affect each individual city, but more about each individual fund the money goes into. But they are talking about, with SB 56, raising the tax to 20 to 25%, which would be one of the highest in the United States. So I think it's going to push business more out of Ohio, not into Ohio. So that is your weekly update. I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis, Coast to Coast News. As of February 2026, the Round Valley Indian tribes are locked in a high-stakes legal battle to prove that tribal sovereignty overrides state police power. After a series of military-style cannabis raids in 2024, the tribe sued California law enforcement, arguing that state officers had no authority to enforce cannabis law on sovereign land governed by the tribe's own medical ordinances. While a federal judge issued a mixed ruling on January 29th, dismissing the idea that the raids automatically violated sovereignty under Public Law 280, the case remains a massive win for civil rights. The tribe can still sue for selective enforcement, racial profiling, and Fourth Amendment violations, unlawful destruction of property. A Ninth Circuit appeal is imminent as tribal leaders fight to establish that because cannabis is legal in California, it is a regulatory matter for the tribe to manage, not a criminal one for the state to invade. Check out the upcoming Great Lakes Indigenous Cannabis and Hemp Summit scheduled for February 25th through the 26th in Wisconsin. The summit will focus on intertribal trade, climate-smart agriculture, and strategies for the November 2026 federal hemp deadline. Lastly, as we continue to report on this tribal nation, the Omaha tribe recently announced they are moving forward with plans for recreational cannabis sales, asserting their sovereign right despite Nebraska's restrictive state laws. That's the latest in Tribal Nations Cannabis. I'm Tina Tasaka for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally, this week, a story about cognitive performance among longtime cannabis consumers. Researchers from the University of Colorado and Georgia Tech studied over 500,000 adults ages 40 to 70 who are living in the UK. Participants shared their lifetime use of cannabis information as well as MRI results and a variety of cognitive tests. The conclusions may surprise many. Quote, this study adds to a growing body of evidence that cannabis use may be associated with greater brain volume and cognitive performance in aging adults, especially in regions rich in cannabinoid receptors. These findings are important because they point to the possibility that cannabis could play a protective role in aging, with implications for brain health later in life. Unquote. We know our resident senior executive producer, Jimmy Young, was very happy to hear that. Now, if he can just remember where he put his car keys. I'm only kidding, Jimmy. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Educate yourself and consume it responsibly. We'll see you next time.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCMTV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCMTV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Elena Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCMTV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCMTV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.